All right, so for dinner tonight, what I'm going to be making are flautas. And so flautas, I think some people call them taquitos, but basically it's just like a crunchy corn tortilla wrapped around chicken. And so the first thing you got to do is what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to get the chicken to boil. So I got these split chicken breasts. I think there are about four. It is about 3.5 pounds. So I'm just going to go ahead and toss these into the pot. And then I'm going to cover them in some water. All right, so we got the chicken in there. I put about 10 cups of water, and usually I'll just eyeball it, but just for the sake of the video, I wanted to give you all like some kind of reference for that. So that's about 10 cups of water, and I purposely fill it up over like what it should be, just because I kind of like to leave it a little bit and then just not forget about it, but so I don't have to be checking it constantly. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add about 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 tablespoons of chicken bouillon. And so it calls for 1 teaspoon for every 1.5 cups of water. So I put in, like I said, about 10 cups of water there. Let me just go ahead and kind of stir this in right here. And I know it should be a little bit more chicken bouillon than this, considering like how many cups I put in there. But this will be good enough for now. And usually you should move like dilute it first with hot water. But I'm just going to do it this way again. This is just easy for me. You get home, you're kind of tired, and you really don't want to, spend all night in the kitchen. So this is just like a simplified version of that. And I'm just going to eyeball some pepper. You might want to start with like a half a teaspoon if you're not a big pepper fan. I do like my chicken kind of peppery. And so I would say it's probably like a teaspoon and a half there, maybe a little bit more. And then I'm going to put some onion powder in here. And I like onion powder. It's probably about like 2.5, maybe even 3 teaspoons. Garlic powder goes a long way. So I'm just going to kind of put a little bit into that. And you can always adjust this later. You let the chicken cook until it's completely cooked through, and then you can taste the broth that it's making. And so definitely don't want to do that now while the chicken is raw, but once you are pretty sure that the chicken is cooked, you can go ahead and start tasting that to see if maybe you need a little bit more salt. And I didn't put any salt in there because the chicken bouillon has some salt in there, so you don't want to overdo it with that. But I'm just going to go ahead and leave this in here, and I'll set a timer for like 30 minutes just to come check on it, but this will take over those 30 minutes. And if you are the type of person who like forgets about what you have on the stove, make sure you're setting timers so that it's better safe than sorry. So I'm going to go ahead and set a 30-minute timer, and then I'll come back and check on this. All right, so it's been about 30 minutes, and I just kind of want to show you where we're at right now. Something I will point out, though, I do put the lid on this for until it begins to boil, and then once it starts to boil, I'll take the lid off just so it doesn't overflow. And so it just with the lid on there, it helps it bring it to a boil a lot faster. So again, I make sure to do that, and then once it boils, I'll take it off and just let it boil on its own. And so right now, the chicken is cooked. You can see it's done. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it in here until it completely starts to fall apart, and that's just going to make it a lot easier for shredding the chicken. So we got that going, and since it is, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add a little bit of paprika to this. I wasn't sure if I wanted to, but yeah, I think I'm going to. That's probably about like a half teaspoon maybe. And so just going to kind of give it a stir. And so it has really good flavor. I don't need to add any more salt. That was the main thing I was concerned about was the salt, but it seems to have enough of that with the 5 tablespoons of bouillon that I put in there for the 10 cups of water. And so again, it's just low maintenance. So I'm just going to leave it in here, probably set a timer for another 20 minutes, and then I'm going to check on it. All right. So what I'm doing now is it's almost at the 20-minute mark from the last time. So altogether it was the 30, then the 20. So it's been about 50 minutes. What I did actually came back about 5 minutes ago, and I just started with with the tongs, grabbing pieces of chicken and just breaking them into smaller pieces. And so I'm doing that just because the smaller the pieces are, the faster they're going to cook. So just kind of starting to take them apart a little bit. And some of them are coming apart pretty easily. Whoops, be very careful when you're doing this for backsplash. And so some of them are coming apart, but I'm going to go ahead and leave this probably another 15 minutes because the way I'm going to shred this chicken, it requires for the chicken to be like just be able to disintegrate when you touch it. So I'm just going to leave it for about another 15 minutes. All right, so it's been about, so we did 30, then 20, then another 15. So it's been about 65 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do next is I am going to take the chicken out. So let me turn off the chicken. And you can see it's falling apart. And so this is pretty much the way I wanted the chicken because it's going to make shredding it a lot easier. So I'm just using a slotted spoon to pull it all out of there. And I'm cooking for anywhere from 3 to 4 people, but this is going to make some leftover chicken. So you can definitely make out of this, you'd probably get about. So this right here would probably make for about 30 flautas or so. And so this is how I am going to shred it. I'm just going to go ahead and use a mixer to do this. So I learned about this. I don't know where I learned about this, but it's been very, very helpful and it speeds up the process and I can do it while it's so hot and not burn myself. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it in a bowl. Find something that has a lid. If not, I've used wax paper before, parchment paper, just to cover this so it doesn't go flying. Probably use a paper plate or something like that. And then just put it over there, over the chicken, and then turn this bad boy on. And I've put mine on to high, just kind of spinning the bowl and holding the lid in place. And so, yeah, there you go. It's starting to get shredded. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it like that. And any little bits that I have to shred by hand, that's going to be okay. But I've gotten most of it done with the mixer. And so a fraction of the time, you don't burn yourself. You can do it while it's still hot. And it goes by so much faster and it's more convenient. So this I'm going to put off to the side. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to make some rice. So I'm going to start the rice next. All right, so what I'm doing right now is I'm going to start the rice. I've actually got the oil over here preheating, so I just have a heavy skillet and I put some oil in this. All right, so when I fill this up with oil, I put it really low. I don't want it super high because then when you try to flip the flautas, like they just keep spinning. And so this way they kind of lay flat and then you can flip it and it lays flat. And so that's going. I'm going to start putting them in when it gets to about 350, a little bit less because I like to pre-cook the tortillas before that. So I'll show you what I mean. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and start the rice. And for the rice, I have 2 tablespoons of bacon grease in there. And what I'm going to do now is just put 1 cup of rice. So it's been heating up for just about a minute or so. I have it on high. I always like to start off on high and then I'll lower down the temperature a little bit. So we've got this in here. I'm just going to put the rice in and just kind of. And what we're trying to do is we're going to fry the rice, make it, give it like a golden brown color. And so that's going to take a little bit of time, but these are some of the things I'm going to add once it gets going. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll add veggies to it. So like tomato, onion, some kind of like peppers and some cilantro at the end. But this is just going to be a very plain Spanish rice. So we're going to give it that like a reddish color to it. And just to go with our flautas. And then I'm going to make a side of beans with that. And the beans are just going to be canned beans. I like these right here. They have a lot of flavor to them. Sometimes I'll make these by hand or from scratch, but for now, for today, just to make things a little bit easier, I'm just going to go with the can. All right, so we've got the rice cooking. Again, so I'm just going to let it brown. And so just make sure you're moving it around in the pan. I always end up losing rice when I flip it that way, but it's pretty efficient doing that and then just kind of mixing it with the spoon. I like these rubber spatulas. That's just kind of what has worked for me, so I'll stick with these. And so what I'm looking for, and like I said, I have the heat cranked up as high as it goes. I'm just going to wait for it to start browning. You'll smell the smell, and you'll notice that golden brown color. And then that's when I will start adding a few other things to the rice. All right, so as you can see, the rice is getting that golden brown color. And if you really like that flavor, let it go before, just stop it before it turns black. But if you like that dark brown color to it and that flavor that goes along with it, keep going. But this is where I'm going to start. Usually I would start adding all the veggies to this. Like I said, onion, tomato, green, some type of pepper. But for this one, I wasn't planning on making the rice. It was just like an impromptu thing. So what I'm going to do for this is I'm just going to put some garlic, and I'm going to put about 2 teaspoons. And I prefer the minced garlic in a jar just for simplicity's sake, or it makes it a lot easier to use. I tried using this Great Value brand from, what is it, Walmart, but it actually left a bunch of like grittiness on the pan, and it tasted like I was eating dirt when I was making that rice. So I don't use that anymore. I use any other brand but that one when I make this rice. And so here we go. It's changing that. It's got that golden and then a brown color to it. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add some tomato sauce. That's such a good smell, that garlic mixing with that rice smell. And now you're going to get this tomato smell wafting up through the air. And so I use about 3/4 of the can. And I'm just going to kind of let the tomato sauce cook for not too long. Stir it up. And it's important not to let the garlic cook for too long because that stuff will burn really quickly and get that bitter taste. So I try not to do more than like 30 seconds before I add in like a wet ingredient that's going to keep it from like cooking further on the hot pan. And I'm losing some rice grains here and there, but that's okay. Most of it is still in the pan. And so the next thing I'm going to do, and this is kind of why I wanted to make this rice, is because we had this leftover broth from the rice. So this is just a leftover broth from the rice. It's already, sorry, from the chicken that I was making earlier. And so you want to make sure that you know that it already has some salt to it from the chicken bouillon. It's already got some seasoning to it, so you don't want to overdo it. What I do like to add, though, to this is some oregano, a little bit of that. I like this garlic with herbs. It just gives it a little bit more flavor. And there's no salt in any of these, which is really important because, again, that chicken bouillon already had the salt in it. So a little bit of onion powder. And usually I would use fresh onions and onion powder. I just really love the taste of onion. Put a little bit of smoked paprika in there. Not too much. I just eyeball everything, but I wouldn't start with more than like a half a teaspoon of some of these. Garlic goes a long way. This right here, cumin, goes a very long way. So if you're not a big fan of that cumin taste, I would start with like a 1/4 teaspoon and go from there. That's probably about a 1/4 to a half a teaspoon. Very, very strong, right? So you don't want to overdo it with the cumin. So just making sure, oh, I almost missed the pepper. And so this is a very plain rice compared to the one I usually make, which is usually like popping with colors and flavors. And so this is still going to be a really flavorful rice with all the herbs and seasonings, but I like mine with, like I said, tomato, onion, pepper, cilantro. It's really good that way. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn this up. I had it about 3/4 heat after I got that browning that I wanted. And now I'm going to crank it up to high heat, let it come to a boil, a nice almost rolling boil. And then after that, I'm going to put a lid on it and cook it for about 20 minutes. I usually check it at the 18-minute mark just to make sure it's not drying out. But especially when you add all those veggies that I was talking about earlier, it usually takes about the 20 minutes. So again, I'm going to let that come to a boil. All right, so the rice is where I want it right here. I'm just going to give it a final stir. Just make sure it's not sticking, kind of like flatten it out a little bit so there's no lumps of rice anywhere. And then what I'm going to do is put the lid on, and then I'm going to turn it down to as low as it goes. And then don't forget the timer, because the last thing you want to do is burn your rice. So I set one for 18 minutes, but this will probably be done closer to the 20-minute mark. All right, so the oil is at about 270. I wanted to get to 350 before I start making the actual flautas, but I'm gonna pre-cook these tortillas. And the reason I do that is just they're a lot easier to handle. They won't tear as easy when you pre-cook them a little bit. So I guess I could have left it a little bit, the oil a little bit hotter, let it get hotter before I put them in, but this will be fine. It's gonna push it into the oil. You don't want to flip them too quickly because then they'll tear. You kind of see my tongs made a mark in that one, which means it was like really close to tearing. So let it sit in here so it gets pre-cooked. It gets a little harder, right? The more cooked it gets, the less fragile it is. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pull this one out. And I'm going to throw another one in there. And so at this point, we have the rice going. There's still about another 15 minutes to that. We've got these pre-cooking. And I'm just going to start off with a small batch just to get going. And then I'll finish up the rest for the family in a few minutes. All right, so I just took them out of the oil a little while ago. So be careful because they're going to be very hot. Just going to kind of flip them around. And there's not a whole lot of points trying to dab off the oil because they're going to go back in there, but it cools down a little bit so you can handle them easier. And so what I'm going to do next is eventually I would have like a pile of them going here, and I would just stack these up, put them off to the side. And then the next part is going to be just grab the chicken, so they're more workable now, right? More pliable, they're not going to tear as easily. And so this is all your preference, right? However much chicken you want on there. I don't like a whole lot on mine inside of my flautas, but this I'm going to do for this first one. I'm just going to put this much. And you just want to kind of make sure that it's all tucked in there. And then just kind of tuck the tortilla under there and then give it a little roll. Then you're going to use a toothpick and just stick it right through there. Hopefully they're not tearing, so you should only need that one toothpick. And this whole time the oil is rising up. Right now it's at about 320. So that's kind of what I want. I wanted to get to that 350 mark before I start putting these in. And so again, just kind of get it a little bit, not so much in the center, but a little bit closer to yourself. Pack it in there. You don't want to pack it too tightly. And then just tuck that underneath and then just roll it. And I wasn't very good at this at first, but with years of making this, like I've gotten a little bit better. My wife used to do most of this part of the rolling, but I took over and I do all right. I think she does better, but that's usually her designated role whenever we make these, or like enchiladas, she'll do the rolling part. And then again, just stuff that in there, not too tight, tuck that in, give it a roll, and then just stick your toothpick so this doesn't come open now or when it's in the fryer in the oil. All right, so we'll give the oil a few more, like a minute or two to reach that 350 mark. All right, so the oil's reached about 357. Sometimes I like to go a little bit higher than the 350 because the oil will cool down once you start putting in the food. All right. And so right now the oil temperature is dropping to like the 330s, 320s. So very important to consider that when you're making these, that the oil temperature will drop and rise as you cook. All right, so I'm going to leave these cooking on the one side for a little bit. And this is what I meant. If I had the oil higher, the flautas would just, if you try to flip them a certain side, they would just roll back to the original side, something about the way that it cooks. And so when you have it like this, especially with the toothpicks in there, they're going to stay on this side until you decide to flip them over, right? If you had filled the oil up higher, again, they would have just kept rolling and rolling to the same side. And so we'll give this the first batch usually cooks pretty quickly. I have the flame on high for this, and it usually cooks pretty quickly. But as you go on with the batches, like it'll start to cool down. The oil will. So, just kind of see it's kind of cooking. Oops, let me bring that up a little bit. Getting that golden brown color. So I'm going to give them the first flip. You don't want to flip them too much. I'm just going to start here. Give all of them. Whoops, these are sticking. Just one flip. And you want it to get to that golden brown color. If you overcrowd it, your flautas will be chewy and soggy and not crispy. So that's one of the reasons why you don't want to overdo it. I would say like 4 at the most 5, depending on the size and the temperature you have your oil. But right now the temperature is still at 328. So just putting those 3 in there dropped it from like 357 to 328, and not too bad of a temperature, but you want it around that 350 mark. All right, so this is what that first batch is looking like. I like mine kind of crispy, so I'm going to make them maybe another 30 seconds or so on this side. As you can see, they're cooking pretty well right there. Some people may not like as much crunch to it, and if that's the case, you can pull them out right now. But I do like mine crispy, crunchy, and so I'm going to leave them, give them about 10 more seconds. All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and put them out. When you do pull them out, make sure that you're draining out that excess oil. And so maybe that's one reason you might want to take them out a little bit early so the other ones aren't sitting there too long as you're draining this. And what I'm doing is I'm standing them up in a bowl so that the oil can continue to drip down from the flauta. Be careful, y'all, because sometimes, especially if you try to eat that right away, it is going to have some, it's going to be very hot, right? So let them sit this way for a little bit while all the oil drains out from the chicken. All right, so the rice has been on there for about 20 minutes. I see there's still some liquid off on the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the heat, remove the lid, and I'm just going to let it sit like this for about a minute or two, and that excess moisture should evaporate. I've tasted the rice, and it is nice and soft, so you know it's not still hard. So all we're going to do now is just let it sit without any heat. I've got the beans going. Remember, I use those canned beans. They're about ready. Just waiting for the rest of the flautas to be done, and I'm going to plate it, and then I'll share that with you all. All right, so now I'm going to finish this off with a little bit of queso fresco, just kind of sprinkle it on top of the beans. And you can mash these and dip them in there. You can put avocado on the side. What I really like to do is just use some sour cream and then just put some of this Louisiana hot sauce in there. Definitely not authentic in any by any stretch of the imagination, but I do enjoy this combination myself. And so what I do is just mix them up really well. And so you got that going there, got that going there. And then usually what I'll do is just dip this in